Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I give my notes and thoughts on running my party of intrepid friends and players through Out of the Abyss, the D&D 5e Underdark campaign adventure, at my friendly local game store. Remember to always support your friendly local game store. Yeah, Amazon's great and everything, and I don't have anything against Amazon, but your friendly local game store also provides community. Like all these people I play with, I've met because of the game store. So anyway, I always like to pitch the friendly local game store when I can. All right, so this video is going to be 2 sessions. I've been doing that more lately. One, to get more information, to cover more ground in each video. And also just because, it can be hard to find time to record and edit with everything else I have going on. So if you've noticed, it's gone from weekly to sometimes weekly, sometimes every couple of weeks, sometimes even longer than that. Maybe we have a session off or something like we had a couple of players out a session a couple of weeks ago. So we played the dungeon board game, right? So because it was a key session and both of the healers were going to be gone. Plus story-wise, I didn't want people missing for their benefit. Okay. So one of the things I normally say is if you're new to this video series, what I do is this is not an actual play. It's not a blow by blow of everything that happened. It's sort of a summary of a session or two, and then also tips on running the adventure, maybe D&D rules clarifications, and Dungeon Master and Game Master or Castle Keeper or whatever term applies to your game that you're playing, just tips in general. And I try to be transparent into my thoughts as a DM and the way I do things, for good or bad, whether it makes me look good or bad. I just try to be transparent. You'll also notice I'm joined by Naomi, my kitty. I put this chair here just for her so she can hang out there. She'll meow at me and complain at me sometimes if I don't let her hang out next to me. So I've got her all riled up. What do you think of Out of the Abyss? Well, I think it's pretty fun, but it can be scary. And those demon lords sure are crazy. So that's what Naomi thinks about it. So anyway, and if you're a returning viewer, as always, thank you so much. One of the reasons that I keep doing this video series is because people keep telling me that it's very helpful. Even though the engagement levels are not always there for the amount of time it takes me to do it. But I like to help people, and I love the feedback and everything. So there we go. All right. So I'm going to try to be a little bit quicker on the video this time. We don't have any viewer feedback. I think that's the first time that's happened in a long time. I got a couple of notes and rules clarifications. We'll jump right into the video. First, I wanted to point out something kind of fun that happened, kind of spontaneous. This is the stuff I love about tabletop D&D that, or tabletop RPGs, that the online experience or a single player video game or an MMO or something is going to be hard to replicate. The players ended up being confronted by Zuggtmoy, the demon lord. We're in the Fetid wedding chapter. And as a reminder, even by the book, you're supposed to go to Menzo Bronzin before the Fetid wedding. I took Elven Tower's advice. They have a great Out of the Abyss campaign guide on their site. I can't recommend it enough. You can also go to the DM's Guild and get a PDF version of it. It's helped me tremendously for this campaign. But they suggested doing the Fetid wedding first and then the City of Spiders, and I agree with that. And also be aware, the City of Spiders, I'm going to start running it tonight. Our next session's tonight. Has a lot of moving parts, kind of like Gracklestugh. So I'm probably going to abbreviate it some, because we've been in this campaign for a long time and we're having fun, but I'm ready to get us to the climax. And having a big, huge moving parts that's not super, doesn't have good notes in the book and all that, because Gracklestugh, I mean, Elven Tower helped a lot. Other resources, if you go watch those videos, had a lot of moving parts. You really need flowcharts and all this stuff. I'm not sure if City of Spiders is that bad. But anyway, I digress. We'll talk about that next video. But just be aware, I will cover all of the stuff in the book in the videos, but my party that I lead through or that I DM through the City of Spiders, we may not hit everything. In fact, we'll maybe hit about 50% of it. And that's fine. As a DM, you can pick and choose as you want, as long as the players are having fun. Now, if you have a player that's like, oh, I've been waiting to get to the City of Spiders so bad because of this one thing, and you weren't planning to run that, and they're not metagaming, they just somehow know something or whatever, maybe go ahead and take it to them. You want to make sure they're having fun. But again, don't become a vending machine for your players. You want to have fun too. It's a fine line to walk. But anyway, so Tom, they were fighting Zuggtmoy, and then they ended up fighting Juiblex straight on. Now it is a somewhat weakened Juiblex that we'll get into by the book. Goes into how to handle that, but it was still Juiblex, one of the demon lords that they're fighting in a big huge melee. And so Tom literally, as soon as I said, okay, Juiblex, let's roll initiative, Tom literally busted out an abacus, and he has this abacus, and I've seen it once or twice before, but the timing has never been so great where he's like, whoop, abacus, because if you don't know, like an abacus, if you know how to use it, an abacus can be really quick and really effective for doing calculations. There are still areas of the world today where, like financial transactions are done by just huge amounts of people lined up in a room or whatever running abacuses. But again, I digress, but it was just funny. And I love that kind of thing. So props to Tom. And I think he's one of the healers. He's a bard. And then his wife plays the cleric in the game. Like their real world husband and wife. So they're, a lot of times trying to keep up with people's hit points and helping them out and stuff like that. So that's why he busted out the abacus. Or that was great. Maybe he was keeping up with how many hit points that Juiblex had taken. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it was to keep track of healing. The other thing is, I wanted to encourage you to just be creative and spontaneous when you need to do stuff. You don't have to prepare everything beforehand. In fact, a lot of the things that work best or that are good moments in my games are just, I got a problem, I got a challenge, let me just solve it real quick. And they got in, and ahead of time, I knew they were going to be fighting Juiblex, but I didn't have a figure pick. I was like, well, we'll figure out how we're going to do it. Thought maybe I might draw on the map, just here's where Juiblex is at. But when the fight with Juiblex happened, the game store we're at, this is another advantage to game stores, and playing in a game store. I look around, I'm like, I wonder if I could use something. So I'm like, let me, because they got all kinds of figures and cases, and they've got all kinds of Warhammer stuff and wargaming stuff just setting out. And a lot of times if I need a figure, I may just walk up and to support the store, buy something, from them, or I'll say, hey, can I borrow this for one game? And they'll be like, sure. No, I'm not saying your game store owner will be like that, but I got a great relationship with mine. Hey, Nate. And also I want to give a shout out to my show sponsor, for Shane Plays Geek Talk, is Game Goblins in Little Rock, and they're fantastic. Great store, events every day. Go check them out. But the store that I run my D&D game at, because a few years ago I was trying to help them build up their D&D, which has now, there's lots of great games going there, is Nate, Nathaniel, and it's Imagine Games in Sherwin, Arkansas. So check them out too. But also, want to give a shout out. I appreciate the help and support from Game Goblins. They're both great game stores. So, and I don't like to be tribal. I try to support everybody. And the game store in Jacksonville, Brian Blevins, I think is about to open back up after being shut down for quite a while. So anyway, okay. So, but anyway, the point is, I just walked around and I was like, and I found, it was like Warhammer terrain, this big basalt kind of towery, craggy, black thing. And I was like, that's perfect. And so, I saw that, and then I walked around a little more, couldn't find anything better. So I just grabbed that. It was kind of like a little styrofoam or something, some kind of, that terrain. It's not quite styrofoam. I don't know what it's made out of, painted black. Drop that on the map. And now technically, Zuggtmoy or Juiblex is supposed to be huge, I think. And the base of this thing was bigger than huge. Not much, maybe one set of squares larger. But I said, you know what? I said, he just ate Zuggtmoy, because Juiblex literally eats Zuggtmoy. I said, so he's bigger, and it worked fine, and it added a nice level of fun to the game. So I just wanted to point that out. Always feel free to, just kind of jump in there and be imaginative, be creative, be flexible. And if it doesn't work, try better next time. Again, 9 times out of 10, I'm actually working on a post right now for the Shane Plays blog, talking about how to be a quote unquote good GM, and good is subjective. And one of my thoughts is, or one of my main rules is, the players don't know what's supposed to happen or what you had in mind. So 9 times out of 10, they're not going to realize that you screwed up or that you think something went wrong or whatever. So anyway, all right. One other thing, rules clarification. One of my players plays a warlock, and one of their go-to spells is Hunger of Hadar, which is a pretty nasty spell, and they use it to their benefit quite often. I've learned how to, have enemies, and I try not to completely nerf it, but I try to have enemies react more intelligently about it. But it's still a good spell. But anyway, they wanted to, that big Juiblex mini, if you want to call it that, the thing I was using for Juiblex was on the board, and they wanted to cast Hunger of Hadar inside Juiblex and have that effect be all around Juiblex. And, I kind of looked at the spell, and, I was like, I'm not seeing anything here that says you can, cast it wherever you want. And so and this is just to give you insight into how I rule on things on the spot when I'm asked a question. And I always tell my my players, look, this is how I'm going to do it for now, based on this reasoning. And I'll try to be consistent, but if I find out different information, then I'll let you know, and we'll do it that way from that point forward. But I try to communicate. I try not to just, and if they call you on something that you've messed up on, just say, you're right. Sorry about that. You're not perfect too. So, and there's one of my cats scratching at the door. And my cat Buster has now busted in. There's a good chance that Naomi get displaced here in a moment by Buster. You can kind of see him over there, yellow tabby cat. Yellow tabby cat. So Hunger of Hadar, it just says range 150 feet, concentration. Said centered on a point within range, or point with range, and lasting for the duration. I kind of ruled that you have to see the point. Wherever within range, I ruled that you have to be able to see that point. So if you wanted to cast it inside Juiblex, then somehow you would have to be able to see inside Juiblex. There would have to be some method, magical or mechanical or mundane or otherwise, that would somehow let you see inside Juiblex, and then I would let you cast it that way. I thought later, so Juiblex is like this big, huge, like black pudding, really huge, with tentacles and nasty, gloopy, and eyes all over it. So, later I thought, when I had time to think about it, that, due to the shifting nature of Juiblex, I could have given her a chance, to maybe a percentage chance to see briefly inside Juiblex and cast it that way. But anyway, I didn't. So, if you know of a rule as written or a rule as intended that would, go against how I ruled, I'm happy to hear that. I want to hear that stuff. So, like, if you know that, no, you don't have to see, as long as it's with range, you don't have to see it, the target or the target point. I'm happy to know that stuff. I love to get information from the viewers. So, okay, we'll get to the recap now. And I did want to point out, if you're wondering about my tie, it's a Deep Space Nine tie. So I like to wear crazy ties sometimes. I've got like 3 Star Trek ties that my buddy Russ at Salem Communications in Little Rock, 101.1 FM The Answer, and others, I do some talk radio there, gave to me. So Russ, if you happen to be watching, thanks for the tie. I wear them, and they're a big hit at work. And then, but I just like to, sometimes I'll dress up serious. Sometimes I just like to have a little fun. I got this one. I got an Enterprise classic, original series Enterprise. And then I've got this really ugly Worf tie that is so ugly, I'll wear it on one of the videos. So, and there you go. All right. So, to start off with, I think I mentioned last time, one of the players, this is known for sure. One of the players got turned into a flying snake by the maze engine, and it's at one point during this session, or these past couple of sessions, it became this is a flying snake that is somewhat but not very intelligent. It's got first level rogue abilities, because I just, for the pure chutzpah, of the player wanting to play a flying snake and bringing in stats and everything. He's a very creative player, always does fun stuff. That, you know, I said, okay, you could take, because they're a rogue, their character's a rogue. I said, you know, you can have one level of rogue ability, so they can get like sneak attack and all that stuff in certain situations and whatnot. But at another point, this snake has also fallen in love or in heat in an animal sense with a tiefling that's sort of a cat, colorful cat, feline type tiefling, and the snake is in love with the tail. So the snake's always wanting to hang out with that. And at one point during this adventure, the snake also became invisible. So it was one of the party was an invisible flying snake with first level rogue abilities. And that's just D&D that's peak D&D at its finest right there, folks. So, all right. Anyway, so if you remember, they ended the most recent session that I've recapped in the procession of Zuggtmoy's, you know, myconids, spore servants, fungal creatures, whatever, kind of shuffling towards the big ritual cavern where the wedding was going to take place, where she was going to bond with Araumycos, much to the world's detriment, and make this an even more serious situation than what has already come before. Like, this literally frightens Vizeron. He's like, oh, this is bad. Because his whole plan involves the demon lords fighting each other and then the players taking out the weakened remaining ones. And that's not going to happen if Zuggtmoy absorbs Araumycos, which is this huge fungal being that's bigger than nations, if you'll remember. Another thing I wanted to point out, you know, I was looking the other day, the whole region of Araumycos, I didn't see anything in there if the Fair's Rest is in that area or not. So I ruled that there was no Fair's Rest, but maybe I'm wrong or whatever. But that this entire 2 or 3 sessions, they were in the Fetid wedding area. We didn't deal with any Fair's Rest. So now they ended last session with one of the players developing madness, and that madness being that they wanted to get as far away as they could from a previous player character who is now an NPC that has become a spore servant. And I've recapped that a couple of times previously, so I'm not going to do it again here, but they had developed madness, and they wanted to get as far away as from that creature as possible, that spore servant. And, you know, they're freaking out, and we ended kind of like it's like you're surrounded by zombies that for some reason aren't really paying attention to you, but now you're freaking out and drawing attention to yourself. It's kind of a little bit like that. And that's the cliffhanger we ended on. Now, so they had a week to think in between. And when we came back and started up, they were like, okay, we cast Lesser Restoration on Raven. That was the character that was freaking out. I said, okay, cool. I said, give me an in-game reason why you would instantly know to do that, right? Because this is all happening very quick. Like just now, suddenly Raven is going, and starting and about to bolt and, you know, run against the flow of traffic and draw attention and unsettle things. And everybody else, all the other creatures are celebrating, right? They're happy. They're, and then here's somebody freaking out. What's going on? Now they have been given spores by Basidia, Sovereign Basidia, before this all started, that keep them from coming under the influence of the spores for a few hours, and then also kind of helps them blend in, if I remember right. But, you know, it's only going to go so far. So, you know, don't be afraid to challenge your characters and your players on their character actions and say, okay. And you're not saying you can't do that. Don't say you're not allowed to do that. Say, give me a good in-game reason why you would instantly know. And in this case, there's a monk with the sun sword, Sunblade, that they get earlier in the campaign. Dawn, I think it's Dawn or Dawnbringer. I think maybe just Dawn. And you can touch somebody and use Lesser Restoration. So I'm like, how do you know to walk over and touch this? Because this is just now happening right now. Like, we're literally going into initiatives. if something's going to happen. And what they said was, because we had established previously that, there is a rapport, a minor telepathic rapport established among them and the expedition members and all that Sovereign Basidia has established with them. And then that rapport also later will help them establish contact with Araumycos. And they said, well, we can kind of feel it because of the telepathic link. And you know what? I said, that's actually a really good idea. And I'm kind of, there's this thing out there in role-playing and D&D or whatever, where the DM is supposed to always say yes to players. And that doesn't mean that you do every little thing they want, but if they ask, hey, is there a crate around, like if they're on a ship, in a fight in a ship, I remember this from a Dice Stormers Pathfinder game. They were like on some docks with some ships around and stuff like that, and they were getting into a big fight. And they were like, hey, is there like a barrel of something around that could possibly be explosive? And, the DM was like, Ben was like, yes. And so then, they're kind of helping craft the environment and tell the story. And I'm okay with that to a limited extent. But I'm also like, it can also, turn into the players constantly having a deus ex machina, the God in the machine, and whatever they need just happens to be there. So I'm always say yes with qualifications kind of DM, or sometimes say yes. I don't always say yes, 75% of the time. I said, yeah, that's fine. But if that is your reasoning, then that telepathic is two-way, and you're feeling some of her panic. And so anything that you do while this is going on is at a disadvantage. You will be at disadvantage dice rolls wise. I thought that was fair enough. If that telepathic rapport is strong enough that you can tell that she has literally she's not just afraid, she's come under madness, the effects of madness, then it's strong enough that it's going to affect you. And then I also went out because they started using this rapport as a communication system. A lot of comic books do this, like X-Men and Justice League or whatever. If there's a telepath on the team, then the team can it's almost like they have built-in Skype, instant messaging or whatever. They're just constantly talking to each other in complete thoughts, complete sentences, full-on realized, rich conversations, wherever they're at. They could be all over the world and they're talking to each other. And I understand from a writer narrative device, it's very handy. How can we let them communicate? Or how can they be in a fight and they're talking to each other without the enemy knowing what they're about to do? I get that. But just keep in mind, unless you want it to be as DM, this rapport is a very low grade, more like empathic kind of thing. Very limited in as far as exchanging information. So just keep that in mind. And I explain, after I let it go once or twice, like I'm going to tell them by the rapport to do this. And this will happen a lot as a DM or a GM or whatever. You look, okay, even though in the back of your mind, like, but okay. And then they'll do it again. And then it keeps going and getting big. So, what I'll do is I'll try to nip that in the bud and say, it's not quite like that. I'll let a couple others fly and that's fine. I'm not going to retcon that, but it doesn't quite work like that. So that's what they did, is they went into initiative and they had a little bit of craziness, where like, the character ran off to within being 60 feet away. And then, I gave a turn or two for somebody to get to her, the character, and, do something about it. And one of the players does have telepathy, like straight on telepathy, I think, or maybe they used, I can't remember anyway, but they after the character got 60 feet away and was like, whoa, because if you see the object of your panic, you'll freak out again. So it's whether you're 60 feet away or you can see it. So you could be a mile away. If you can see it, you're still freaking out, according to this spell. That it's like attraction, repulsion. I don't know. I went over it last time. That it's not an actual spell effect, but the madness is like that. And so they ran and they hit the end of their turn and they're facing away, but they're 60 feet away. So now they're not feeling the effects. But if they turn around, and head back to the group, boom, they're going to feel it again. So, and this procession is probably miles long. So it's not like they're away from the procession. Further chances of attracting attention. Even just somebody just standing there, while people are going around them or whatever. So telepathically, I can't remember how, but telepathically, legitimately, and it wasn't through this rapport, somebody communicated to the character, said, stop, don't turn around. And, we're about to help you. And the monk was running up behind her, was going to be there very soon to touch her with the sunblade, which would lesser restoration, which would take care of it. And So, that's how it worked out. And it worked out fine. But yeah, there was a little bit of drama there. So that was fun. Fun way to do a cliffhanger. Remember, we ended on that cliffhanger, which was not written in the book, but it emerged, it was emergent natural gameplay and a great place for a cliffhanger. So that's another advantage to D&D, at the table, or RPGs at the table over pre-scripted MMOs or single player video games. I'm not down on those. I like them, but there's a whole different level of imagination at the table, which you can get it on Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds. You can get a lot of that same dynamic. Although I do think there is something to be said for being together, like, hey, I'm having an abacus, and everyone's laughing. So, okay, so after that, they make it to Araumycos. And when they get to Araumycos, there's basically, essentially they fight, when they try to establish, hey, Araumycos, we want to help you. Remember, Araumycos is kind of dazed and under this influence of Zuggtmoy's been using magic and spores to try to lull Araumycos. So it's almost like you're waking somebody up in the middle of a bad dream and they're lashing out, So even though they're there to help and they're trying to say, hey, we're here to help, Araumycos lashes out. And the way Araumycos lashes out is for all intents and purposes, they're neo-otyughs. But they're made of fungus and plants, not whatever. They're not aberrations. They're elementals or something. Let me see how they did it in the book here. Hold on a second. So let's go to page. Oh no, they're not neo-otyughs. It says two fungal creatures, and this is at the top of page 212. Two fungal creatures resembling otyughs rise up and attack the characters. Created by Araumycos to perfectly duplicate the abilities, traits, and actions of otyughs, these creatures are plants rather than aberrations. They attack until slain, whereupon each bursts into a cloud of sweet-smelling spores as its body dissolves back into the larger mass of fungi filling the cavern. So, so as soon as they defeat the otyughs, like I said, they're otyughs in all intents and purposes except they're plants. That's their creature type. As soon as they're defeated, they burst, and all these spores and stuff cover up. All right, so the players get all covered up, and this is where a lot of especially more modern players or newer players or whatever, they want everything to be ultra sandbox where they have control over everything. Old school D&D, sometimes the DM just said, here's what happens, and that's what happens. And this is kind of an old school moment where it's more of a cutscene than an interactive narrative moment. So the creatures burst like an overfull wineskin, releasing a clear ichor and a cloud of dusty spores. The deflating bulk of its body sinks back beneath the shimmering fungal field where you stand. Your vision starts to swim and you feel dizzy and faint. Your limbs are numb and your legs no longer support you. So, it does say a successful DC 13 intelligence, arcana, or nature check confirms the characters are in no physical danger, but are entering rapport with Araumycos. The adventurers are paralyzed as the myconid spores fully take effect. Even creatures immune to sleep and paralysis are affected as the spores seep into mind and body. The characters collapse harmlessly to the soft surface of Araumycos, its fungus quickly spreading across them as the rapport begins. When this happens, continue with Into the Gray Dream. And into the Gray Dream is the next part where they literally go, it's not the astral plane. It's like the mind of Araumycos, who is currently dreaming, but for everything else, it's like his own personal or its own personal astral plane. The way you move around, combat, all of that is like being on the astral plane. If you get to reduce to 0 hit points, you just wake up. And all your physical damage and everything that you've taken is gone. And also the way I explained it, I said this fungus completely covers you up. You're like underneath the surface of the spongy fungus, but you're almost like in stasis or on life support. You're not in danger of dying or going hungry or thirsty or anything like that, or suffocating. And that doesn't quite say it like that in the book, but that's how I described it. Now, I recommend that you go look up the rules on astral travel. Basically, you go any direction that you want to go by thinking about it, and off you go, and your intelligence determines your rate of speed. You basically fly around or walk around or whatever you want to do. But I will point out that I did a couple of things here, and it doesn't directly say this in the book, but I ruled that like they have representations of themselves with their weapons and their armor and this and that and their items. But I said the sentient weapons could communicate with their masters in dream world. And they say, hey, your bodies are okay. But they couldn't. The sentient weapons did not come in. So, if you have wave, which is this trident, I think I ruled that the character had a representation of a magical trident, like a +3 trident, but it wasn't wave with all the other abilities and everything like that. Same thing with Whelm, the hammer. In fact, I used, because the players, and I made like a mini game of them figuring out how to move around in this dream world, this astral plane, pocket astral plane of Araumycos' mind. So I sort of had some fun with it. And I prompted the players to try to kind of figure it out by giving them intelligence or arcana. I think I also allowed a religion of a DC 15 to figure out that it's basically just like astral projection, or just to intuit how to move. And then I randomly rolled for the players that had Whelm and Wave, and Whelm ended up communicating with Thorn and saying, look, pay attention to what you feel. What are you feeling? And the reason I said that, because the book says there's this sort of psychic tug, this pull. We want to go this way. And so he ended up, strangely enough, the dwarf melee fighter is the one that figured out intelligently how to move. And was like, oh, well, I want to go that way. And then off they go for it. And the mini game I played with the players, and I wasn't going to let it go indefinitely, was they had to say, I want to do something, or something along those lines. Not just I go that way, but I want to go that way, or, I think about going that way, or something like that. And it was interesting to watch. Like I said, I love psychology and group dynamics. And one of the things about this group, like I said, they're a group. They work together well. They've overcome a lot of challenges at lower level than the book recommends, even when, the party's not overwhelmingly large. I think we're about 7 right now, 6 or 7. But one thing, sometimes stuff they won't do is they won't proactively communicate details to each other. And I've made it clear that, just because your player knows something doesn't mean everybody at the, table does, unless you've had like a short or long rest in between. And then we can assume that you're sharing details out. And in that case, you need to tell me if you're not sharing it out. But when stuff happens right then, they don't necessarily know. So Thorn ends up zipping off. And they're like, whoa, where'd he go? And then slowly, one by one, the players start figuring it out. And it led to this sort of staggered series of characters just suddenly zipping off in that direction where the pool was at. Later in the same session, one of the players like proactively shared information. I can't remember what it was about. And I said, okay, stop. And I gave them 100 XP on the spot. I said, thank you. And I pointed out that, and I wasn't trying to jump on them. I want to point out, none of y'all shared with each other your discoveries about how to get around in the astral plane. And they're like, oh yeah, you're right. So after that, they were, sharing a little bit more. So, but yeah, they would each figure it out and then just take off. and then, eventually they all kind of figured it out. So what happens here is that they follow this feel, and there's a description in here of this astral plane, this dreamland. It's like gray and like a cloudy day with the sun trying to come through, I think, or something like that. And there's little shimmers of color here and there, and there's objects in the distance that you're not sure if they're little tiny pebbles or huge mountains floating. And they're just zipping along, and they're kind of having fun and flying around. And one of the things I did for role playing is I said, I went around to each player and I said, tell me how your character feels about flying through this, whatever it is. And I think we eventually, I kind of, without outright saying it, I said, it's basically, I think one of the players rolled well enough that I said, this feels very much like astral projection, astral plane type thing, but at the same time, you don't think it's the astral plane. And by this point, they got okay, we're in his brain, we're in his consciousness or whatever, or his subconscious or something. And they each went around and explained how they felt. And that was really interesting. And some of the stuff was kind of surprising. A couple of the characters were frightened. None of the characters, or none of the players said that their characters were enjoying it. That surprised me. I thought, a couple of them at least like, well, I'm going to do loop-de-loops and have fun. No, they were feeling the tension of the situation, which was very interesting. But they eventually come up on this huge mountain-sized skull. Huge. And inside of it is, inside of the skull, you can see it through the nose, I guess, and the eye slots, is a big, huge fungal mass that basically is kind of like a big brain floating inside of that giant skull. And this is basically the representation of Araumycos' mind. And they get a vision in here. While this is going on, they get a sense that the wedding ceremony is beginning. So make sure to tell that, it's kind of like, meanwhile, and, they get a vision through Basidia's, through Sovereign Basidia, that the ceremony, if you can call it that, is beginning, and Zuggtmoy is about to bond with Araumycos. So they come to this big skull. It says a giant skull missing its jawbone. And then there's and its surface is covered in lichens and broad patches of mold, the colors resembling those of Araumycos on the material plane. And then there's this big, huge brain thing inside, this big floating cluster of fungus. Now, the minute any character goes inside the skull, it triggers, all of a sudden, Zuggtmoy's attention is brought, and Zuggtmoy manifests astrally, if you will, mentally, and, monologues briefly. And then, she's big, powerful, but then all of a sudden her, she gets before any actual combat with the characters begins, she gets distracted and she says, Juiblex, and disappears. So it's just a nice dramatic moment. If you wanted to have a little bit of a fight with Zuggtmoy there, feel free, but it's not intended to be that. And what I did, the way I did it, because some of the characters had gone into the skull, some of them had hung outside, and I said that, and by the book, I think it even says Zuggtmoy materializes on top of the skull. I said, no matter where you're at, even though it doesn't seem to make sense, you can all see this. And, she's like, oh. So when she leaves and the disruption that she causes by popping in and then popping back out wakes Araumycos up fully. And he's like, whoa, and he's like, yeah, this is bad. Of course I'm paraphrasing. He's like, whoa, this is bad, dude. But yeah, he's like, oh, yeah. He says that, Zuggtmoy has already infected its mind with her demonic influence, and he can feel it, or Araumycos can feel it growing in strength. It's only a matter of time before it falls to the Demon Queen's will. It says, focused but fearful, the entity asks the adventurers to cut out and destroy the diseased part of its mind before it's too late. So he guides them, it's a fungus. If you want to call it a he or she, you can. And but I keep trying to say it just to give it more of a icky entity, alien feeling. Same thing with myconids. So they're guided. They go to the far side. Are guided to the far side of the suspended fungus cluster inside the skull, where a dark mass is spreading. The first time any character comes within 20 feet of the black mass, it erupts with the effect of an Everard's black tentacle spells. The infected area of Araumycos' mind has AC 13, 100 hit points, and vulnerability to necrotic and psychic damage. When the infected area first takes damage, Zuggtmoy senses it and turns her attention away from Juiblex in an attempt to stop the characters. As she exerts her will over Araumycos, a burst of spores spreads out in a cloud from the infected area. Any creature within 20 feet of the infected area must make a successful DC 19 Constitution saving throw or take 3d6 poison damage and become poisoned. While poisoned in this way, the creature takes 3d6 damage at the start of each turn. A poisoned creature can repeat the saving throw on each of its turns, ending the effect on its success. Remember, poisoned is a condition, I think, where you have disadvantage on certain checks. Ability checks, maybe combat. I'd have to look it up. It's one of the DM screen I use. I love the art on it, but the charts on the inside aren't so great. But it's the first 5e DM screen that came out. But I love the art on the front of it. There's a new screen out. It's called Revised or Remastered, and evidently the charts on the inside are much better and information. But I don't like the art as much, so I stick with my old one. But anyway, one of the few references that's handy is there's a list of conditions right there, and I have to refer to that a lot. So when the area reaches 100 hit points, a powerful psychic wind howls through the area. You need to go look up psychic wind. Go the astral plane in chapter 2 of Dungeon Master's Guide. Now they only take the psychic wind has no location effect. So you get if you get hit with psychic wind on an astral plane or the astral plane, you can get a location effect, which means you get blown around, and you can also take a mental effect. So in this case, don't worry about the location effect, but do the mental effect. And one of the things about this is that when you take damage, and I think we did have one or two characters like get taken down to 0 hit points, maybe from poison or something. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I said, okay, you're unconscious. And I said, you wake up, back in your body. You're like under the fungus, but you're fine. You're not dying or suffocating, but you're under the fungus. They just kind of wake up. But in any damage or whatever is not there, from being on, this limited version of an astral plane with Araumycos. However, I did rule, and we had at least, I think one, if not two, characters came under a mental effect from the psychic wind. And I did rule that lasted. Like the bard, ironically enough, started babbling. And I think another character, something happened with them. They went stunned or catatonic I think they got knocked unconscious, which maybe is why they woke up. I can't remember anyway. They were both minor narrative, interesting things, but they didn't really affect gameplay, but it did carry over after they woke up. That's how I ruled that. Now there's the next couple of pages here has a lot of notes on if you helped Araumycos or if you didn't help Araumycos, or if you fought the demon lords and won, if you defeated Juiblex, or if you didn't defeat Juiblex, or if you ran. It's got all these different scenarios that, you probably want to look over. But what I did, I'm going to give the chain of what my players did, which was they fought Juiblex and won. They did have a death in the party and an expedition member died, but and also, the expedition did not come into the astral plane. They were sitting there kind of watching the bodies and going, whoa, what is going on here? And but they knew it was part of the plan, so they didn't dig them out of the fungus or anything like that. It says if the characters are defeated on the astral plane, it says Araumycos remains conscious enough to resist Zuggtmoy with a final effort, which that isn't what happens here. So it says characters reduced to 0 hit points in the battle on the astral plane, and this is on page 213 under Let Them Speak Now. If the characters free Araumycos from Zuggtmoy's influence, they weaken the power of the demon queen of fungi, fatally distracting her. So Juiblex eats her, but the characters directly contributed to that. With the loss of many of her fungal minions and the amount of power she has suspended to perform her ritual, Zuggtmoy is weakened to the point that Juiblex overwhelms her, destroying and consuming her material form and casting her essence back to the abyss. And now the characters have earned the entity of a demon lord personally. Yeah, if they're reduced to 0 points in the battle on the astral plane, or Araumycos' astral plane, they're catapulted back to their bodies. Their rapport with Araumycos is broken, and they are helpless to intervene further in the conflict going on within the entity's mind. You can have a group of oozes or spore servants from the Araumycos encounters table appear in the cavern. So that way, characters who are shunted out can still have something to do, but it didn't really become an issue with me. Now, they all wake up finally, and the expedition's looking at them, and when they're getting their stuff together, and the bard's babbling. But eventually, they got their stuff together. And there's notes in here if the characters just try to run and not get involved in the big battle. There's notes on how to handle that. But if the adventurers head toward the battle between two demon lords after awakening from the rapport, and they hear, like, as soon as they wake up, I mean, it's obvious the battle's that way. I mean, there's a huge Titanic battle kind of that way. And so the adventurers head towards the battle, which my party did. If your players are like, no, why are they playing? But anyway, there's notes in here on how not to do. Maybe they're in really super bad shape and they know they can't defeat Juiblex. I don't know. Anyway, if the adventurers head towards the battle between the two demon lords after awakening from the rapport, they arrive, and I just kind of played it loosely. I said, you run down a tunnel for a little while, and then you come into the big ritual cavern, and here's all this stuff going on. So there's, myconids everywhere, and anyway, I said, they arrive, the book says they arrive just in time to see the grotesque display of the faceless lord slurping up the defeated Zuggtmoy into the mass of its body, enveloping and dissolving her before turning its attention toward the newcomers. Oh, and one note I want to make, it didn't give, when you're fighting the Black Mass and then Everd's, the effect like Everd's Black Tentacles pops up. In order to resist Everd's Black Tentacles or whatever, you need to make a saving throw. But it doesn't say in the book what saving throw to level to use. Now, Everd's Black Tentacles, let me find it here. Sorry, give me a second. Okay, yeah. It is a 4th level conjuration. So I guess you could, if you wanted, you could go and calculate, what would be the average spellcaster level that could throw a 4th level conjuration, and then, kind of come up with a DC there. Again, a quick rule of thumb, I think I talked about this last video, for DCs, and this is what I did. If it's easy, DC 5. If it's average, DC 10. If it's tough but not, really hard or almost impossible, DC 15. And then if it's just kind of an epic, big deal, DC 20, maybe even higher. So I just went DC 15 on that. So there's just little details. I've seen criticisms of Out of the Abyss from others that I started to agree with. There's just little, what to me seem like common sense details that are left out. But maybe they're just assume the DM will fill stuff in. Okay. So when they fight Juiblex, it says under normal circumstances, Juiblex would be an overwhelming foe. And he's in the Appendix D of this book. And the Demon Lords are also in the new Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes book. Fortunately for the adventurers, the Faceless Lord's battle with Zuggtmoy has weakened it. The characters might also have aid from allies, the newly freed Myconids and Araumycos, in overcoming the Demon Lord. So, this is what the book recommends. It says its current hit points are 200. It has no more uses of legendary resistance for the day. Its eject slime action has been used and must recharge. And actually, it ended up recharging a couple of times during our battle. And it has no layer actions or regional effects. So, but then it does not go on to say adjust the CR, and it says if the characters rid Araumycos' mind, if it's a demonic affection, award each of them 2000 XP, but it doesn't go on to say how many XP to award for defeating Juiblex. So they give you the nerfed notes for Juiblex, but they don't tell you what to take the CR down to. And I think if I remember right, Juiblex is normally a CR 23. Make sure to study the stat blocks and the notes for everything that Juiblex can do, especially its eject slime. What I did, I nerfed by the book, but I think I put the hit points up a little higher, maybe 250 or something like that. And then, as I'll often do, after he got to 0, I let it go like one more initiative round or turn of initiative, and then the next person that damaged him after that, after he got to go again, dropped him. And then what I did is with the eject slime, I let it target 2. I gave him 2. He could target 2 characters with the eject slime, not just 1. But then I made it random who got hit. And so I think I ended up, at first I was going to go CR18, but then because I made the eject slime tougher and he used it a couple of times by, I rolled recharge on the dice, 5 or 6 at recharges. I think I bumped him up to a CR19. But I'm sure there's a mathematical way to calculate CR, and I didn't go into all that. So the other thing that can happen in here is Basidia rallies 30 Myconid adults and 32 Drow Spore Servants to fight alongside the characters. Their attacks are incapable of harming Juiblex. However, as they swarm around the Demon Lord, one time per round, not per turn. This, it can be character after character after character doing this, but one time per round, as agreed upon by the players, a character who would be hit by an attack can have a Myconid or Spore Servant hit by the attack instead. Myconids can also fight off oozes, allowing the adventurers to focus their attention on the Demon Lord. If the adventurers freed it from Zuggtmoy's influence, Araumycos aids them by releasing spores into the cavern, granting all living creatures in the area immunity to poison damage in the poison condition. That's very important, because if you get close to Juiblex, and this isn't nerfed by the book here, you can nerf it if you want. If you're within 10 feet or something like that of Juiblex, you get poisoned. I can't remember if you take poison damage, but you get poisoned. So that immunity is very handy. It let this party's monk and a couple other people roll right up. Foul. Yeah. Any creature other than an ooze that starts its turn within 10 feet of Juiblex must succeed on a DC 21 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned at the start of the creature's next turn. So that's nice. Now remember, legendary actions are gone, and there's no layer effects or anything like that. Juiblex regenerates unless it takes fire or radiant damage. So keep that in mind. And my players just so happened they did fire or radiant damage every round, so that helped them. Juiblex never got that 20 hit points back at the beginning of its rounds or its turns. Now, what I did, in addition to the help from the Myconids, I also said, look, if you want to use the expedition, you can, but, always remember it'll affect how many experience points you get. I said, but I will also allow you the option of also once per round, you can choose for an expedition member to be randomly hit by something. If you were going to get hit by an attack from Juiblex. And I said, look, this isn't, because they were like, ooh, that's not, this isn't you're literally grabbing somebody and putting them in front of you. It's representing all the activity and the chaos going, and maybe even they jump in front of you on their own or whatever, so that you can succeed in your mission. I said, it's not a chaotic evil, type thing. But I said, you still have to choose to use it. And the character that died, actually got hit by Juiblex twice, and they knew on the second hit they were going to die. I said, do you want to use either one of the, the Myconid or the expedition member? And the player was like, no, because right on the character sheet, it said that one of the personality traits, I don't know if it was a bond or a flaw or whatever, was that, they will sacrifice for others, even up to the point of death. So in their mind, they were kind of like purposefully preventing that to die. And I said, that's fair enough. And it was the player actually had a noble death where everyone was like solid. This is the player before that has, Zuggtmoy sends, or Demogorgon sends his regards and throws fire at Zuggtmoy. to try to start a gang war. This is the same player that had the paladin Mara, who now has come back because of the maze engine, that charged an adult red dragon at 2nd level, hit it, got killed. Bunch of just weird, crazy stuff. And everyone's like, what? And there's like, in our Facebook group, we literally have hash marks on an image, on our banner image, showing how many deaths this player's had. But this was a noble one. And I went out of my way to say, that was a noble death. That was cool. And everyone's like, yeah, that was cool. So that player's dead, or that character's dead. Not the player ever, please. and is rolling up a new character to join us on tonight's session. So, and also, I think at the end, about halfway through the fight, I started, when Juiblex did certain things like acid splash or whatever, I also gave like a 50% chance for an expedition member to get hit. And that happened once. So another expedition member has randomly died. And so, those expedition members are dropping like flies. Now, for next chapter in the Drow City of Spiders, I'm going to basically tell them Vizeron, and everyone's like, do not take the entire expedition to inside Menzoberranzan. Maybe you can park them outside, but don't take them in, because, you've got to be stealthy here. You can't go marching into Menzoberranzan with an expedition, even if you think you're being sneaky. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. The expedition is kind of fun, kind of not, but it's a lot to keep up with sometimes. You can have some fun role-playing moments with it. So it goes on, if you defeat Juiblex, which these players finally did, says, even if Araumycos survives, its fate is unclear. There's a lot of wrapping up stuff here. It's basically kind of weakened and almost has like brain damage. Its mind has been damaged by both the necessity of cutting away, because you basically players will do brain surgery. You're cutting out a tumor kind of in a very, hacky, non-subtle way. The necessity of cutting away its corruption, and the buffeting of the force of the psychic wind. So Araumycos got knocked around by that psychic wind too. Go look up the psychic wind. It's kind of interesting what causes those and what they do. Basidion and the Myconids offer to meld with Araumycos to try to heal it and guide it back to wholeness. Though not as serious as death, the trauma still causes a significant amount of fungal die-off in areas of the creature's domain, potentially uncovering lost ruins or other hidden sites. In addition to possible victory over 1 or 2 demon lords, my players have gotten 2 demon lords off the table now. The adventurers receive one last bequest from the mind of Araumycos. A puff of rapport spores or a lingering psychic connection offers to inform them of one or more of the secrets of the Underdark gathered during the entity's vast existence. If you want to provide the players with any remaining information about virtually anything in the adventure, it's an excellent opportunity to do so. I didn't do that. What I did was he said, Araumycos is like, I've been in your mind and I know one of the things you search. And I said, this big mound kind of comes up in the spongy surface fungus floor. This mound of fungus rises up and it splits open, and there's 13 Tamask mushrooms. And he said, those are from the footprint of a Balor, because I think it's a Garistro or Balor or something else. So they're like, sweet. So that's how I took care of that, because, they kept asking, how are we going to find these mushrooms? So I just had that happen. And then in addition to, or instead of providing information, and this is what I did here, the last connection to the surviving Araumycos can bestow a charm of heroism to all the player characters. And it's, a charm. It's actually like a charm that they can carry with them or put on their clothes or whatever, and they can use it once, and it's like a potion of heroism. Look under other rewards in chapter 7 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. And then it mentions here the 13 Tamask mushrooms on the list required can be found in the aftermath of the failed wedding ceremony, sprouting in locations touched by Zuggtmoy or Juiblex, which kind of goes against what the criteria were, unless Vizeron said a demon lord's footprint. I'd have to go look that up. And if the characters didn't collect traces of blood from a demon lord, they can also get it here from this fight between the 2 demon lords. So if the characters rid Araumycos' mind of its atomic affection, award them 2,000 XP. If the party delivers to Vizeron all the components he needs to craft his Dark Heart Talisman, give them an additional 2,500 XP. Now they still have to go to the City of Spiders. Now remember this, the way that the book is written, it assumes that you do the City of Spiders and get Gromf Bonray's magical tome, and then you go get all the other stuff, and then we're ready to do the talisman. So see if there's any other note. Now read into, there's other notes in here. There's a lot of stuff like if you didn't achieve victory, if you did achieve victory, if you did this, if you didn't do that. There's a lot of notes in here that, I recommend that you look over. But let me see if I'm missing anything else. Yeah, Raven died. We already went over that. Expedition member died. Oh yeah, one thing that I did do, because I didn't want to leave the player who was a flying snake perpetually, even though he was extremely good-natured about it. What I did was when Zuggtmoy died, I ruled that this wave of dark, mad energy pulsed out through the whole cavern. And as part of that, it transformed him from a flying snake back to his normal self. So that was a good narrative way to, we had several sessions where he was the snake, but I also wanted to find a way to get him back that was a good game moment or narrative moment. I didn't want to leave him like that forever. And on the charm, the charm, because it's actually, like a physical thing, this charm of heroism, I ruled it was kind of a little fungal plant fiber thing, almost like something Swamp Thing would pop out and say, here, take this. But, do that however you want. I think that's everything. And then they, speaking of the expedition, now the expedition was going to go with them anyway, but for a role-playing moment, I made it so they had to sort of sweet talk and cajole about half the expedition into heading towards the ritual cavern, because that battle sounded nasty, and some of especially the Zentarum and the spies and stuff were like, but their leaders were like, you will go. That's what we're here for. Even the Zentarum leaders, and, the players were like offering them more loot and this and that and the other. And, the leaders of the various factions, and some factions are like, absolutely not, we're here to help. But the ones that were kind of like, were like, hey, if they want to give you more loot, that's fine, but you're going to do it whether more loot or not. Now let's go. And then off they went. So that was a nice role-playing moment. Okay, I think I covered everything. Let me double check. Yes, thanks for watching. That's the end of these past two sessions recaps. Look at the next couple of weeks. We'll have, another episode. Thanks for watching. If you would leave me a thumbs up on the video and maybe a comment, that helps me out a lot. Any engagement at all helps the visibility of the videos a lot. So, and as I said before, these videos, out of everything I do, by the time I record them and edit them and everything, they take longer than almost any other thing I do, and they don't always get the most visits. So, I don't mind doing it, but if you could help me out, I appreciate it. And I'm about to be revamping my Patreon, because right now it's just focused on the radio show, but I'm about to be revamping all my Patreon. So that's another way that you can help me out. Once I'll make an announcement on that soon. But anyway, thanks so much. And we will catch you next time on Shameplay.
Dave, Doc Hallen's been killed.
Doc Hallen, what happened?
It's over at his place. You gotta come now.
Oh, wait a minute, Steve. Tell us what happened.
Well, I'm trying to tell you. Now, this thing had killed the doc.
Well, what was it?
Stop with it, kid. But it's kind of like a mass that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out. Because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater. Two teenagers see it first, like a falling star from outer space.
Boy, that was close. Hey, come on. I want to see if I can find it.
An old man finds it, touches it, and this is the shocking result. From then on, there's no stopping the blob as it spreads from town to town. It's indestructible. It's indescribable. Nothing can stop it.
This town is in danger.
How can it be stopped? Mob hysteria sweeps one city. Before long, the nation, and then the world could fall before the blood-curdling threat of the Blob.
Starring Steve McQueen and a cast of exciting young people.